Round 4 of the 2026 AFL home and away season is in the books, and we got delivered a weekend that delivered some brilliant matchups and some maybe not so much. Join me today as we unpack all of the action from the round that was, including getting in my tips for the MVP award and announcing my team of the week for round 4. This is the round recap. What is going on, YouTube universe? Welcome to the Hip and Shoulder, where we discuss everything Australian rules football. And as I mentioned, round 4 is done and dusted, and we now get the chance to sit back and reflect on the round that was. And it was a round that delivered some different kind of prospects. We got some games that turned out the way we thought they would. We got some absolute classics, and we got some that were blown well out of proportion. More importantly though, even though we are only 5 rounds deep, we are having a pretty much of an even spread across the board. We have teams that are competing that weren't expected to compete. We've got teams that are overperforming, teams that are underperforming, not by their standard, but by the standard obviously set by the viewers at home, by the supporter bases. It's going to be a very interesting year because this whole wildcard configuration we now have with placings from 7th to 10th really opened the door for some of these clubs that are scratching and vying usually for that top 8 to now get opportunity. And I think we've seen some clubs emerge this past weekend that could be knocking on the door of that wild card round. But last weekend all kicked off on Thursday night with Brisbane hosting Collingwood at the Gabba. We know the Gabba hasn't been a fortress for Brisbane as of late. It used to be a place that you could almost just throw away, lock and key. They were going to absolutely dominate you if you went up there. But in recent years, we've seen them falter at home, and teams have been able to get the better of them in that retrospect. But just before this game went live, Nick Daicos was a very late withdrawal with a calf injury. So much so that I quickly jumped online to change my tip to Brisbane because something told me without Nick Daicos in the middle to kind of get that ball moving for them, they were going to struggle. And boy, did they fucking struggle. They struggled to the tune of 54 points. Now, I'm not at all suggesting Nick Daicos' absence at all warrants that 54 points. They were missing some other players. Obviously, they had Scott Pendlebury out with that Achilles tendon strain he had the week prior. Darcy Moore out with a hamstring. But let's not forget, Brisbane have their fair share of outs as well. Harris Andrews still isn't playing in this defensive line. They lost Darcy Gardner the week prior to another injury. So both of these teams came in a little bit ill-prepared in way of their best 23. But Brisbane capitalised more on the opportunity. And unfortunately for Collingwood, this game was pretty much done and dusted in the water at quarter time. The match timeline breaks it down for us all. At quarter time, Brisbane led 6-4-40 to 3-1-19. At halftime, that shifted to 9-8-62, leading 5-3-33. 11-13-79 led 8-4-52 in the third term. And then the final score line, 17-17-119, defeating 10-5-65. This was as comprehensive a performance from Brisbane as we have seen for a very long time. And this is a Brisbane that is a shade of their former selves. They went 0-2 early on in the piece, obviously picking up a scrappy win last week against St Kilda, but came home incredibly strong. And I said that match was going to be the catalyst that would bring them back into form. And boy, oh boy, did they look impressive on Thursday night. Again, as I said, Nick Daicos was replaced with a calf injury by Allen, who came into the team. No other injuries sustained. Nothing really much else to talk about in the way of this game. There was a big tackle laid from Kitty Coleman onto Steele's side bottom. It was an absolute rib cruncher. So I'm surprised there is no injury written down here for Steele's side bottom, because he looked a little bit worse for wear and didn't really look like himself after that hit was initiated. But apart from that, cracking performance by Brisbane. This goes to show you can never write a team off, and people that have been sitting there saying they still regard Brisbane as one of, if not the best teams in the competition, even though they lost their first handful of games, get vindication when Brisbane come out and play like this. Having a look at the team breakdown, Brisbane were 115 disposals better on the night. They had 291 kicks against 162. They did have 14 less handballs, which we know Collingwood like to get ball kind of shifting by kick, by handball, but the efficiency was great, but it was the inside 50 efficiency where Brisbane capitalised, scoring 54.7% of the time, which is just under their season average of 56. 33% for Collingwood, which is down on 43% from their season average so far. Around the ground, hitouts were only just marginally won by Collingwood in the way of 6, but the clearance game was absolutely dominated. They had 18 more clearances around the ground. 11 of those were stoppage clearances. Again, contested possessions, they were outdone by almost 40. Uncontested possessions, they were done by 76. It was a masterclass by Brisbane. As I said, this is the Brisbane that we have come to appreciate with the premierships we have seen them win in recent years. This gives us enough belief that their best is still the best, that they can go on and do a three-peat this year. It was outstanding. It was great. And there was an even spread of performers and people, you know, contributing to the team. It was something that I think a lot of teams with younger kids coming through the system, you kind of have some kids kind of take a little bit to develop. They kind of don't find their feet real quick. With Brisbane, they've had the opportunity, obviously, to go through the academy and to bring these kids in, and they're already at a whole other level compared to some of the other kids that we see drafted through. I mean, when you have a look at the best players across the course of this game and just list some of the young names through here, Logan Morris, Jasper Fletcher, Levi Ashcroft. We go down a little bit, we find ourselves Darcy Wilmot, we find Kai Lohman, Cam Rayner, Dara Joyce even had some moments of brilliance as well. Ty Gallup was serviceable. And then obviously you have their seniors popping off. I didn't mention Will Ashcroft under the young ones as well. Absolutely. I don't know how I missed him because he was quite comfortably best on ground in this game. But the senior heads as well standing tall. Everybody expected Lachie Neale to have a very rough year this year, just following up on the preseason that he had. You know, the divorce from his wife, the separation, you know, how highlighted it was in the media. Anybody wouldn't have blamed him for dropping the ball and fumbling a little bit, but he's come out like a fucking demon out of hell, and he's had a point to prove. He's got a chip on his shoulder. He knows the media is looking at him, and he's coming out and playing like the champion that we have known him to be. It is just absolutely incredible to see him playing this way when so many instances in past years we've seen players who have found themselves in adversity a little bit really struggle to get their game off the ground. More senior players, like Dane Zorko was great. Kitty Coleman, more about that, mid-age range. He was great. Zach Bailey had a very good game. Jared Berry, again, had a good showing. Ryan Lester in defence. Josh Dunkley. You could just go on and on and on about the list of Brisbane players that were so competitive and brought something to this game. Unfortunately, when you then turn attention to the highest rated Collingwood players on the field, outside of the top 10, or inside the top 10 rather, there is only one Collingwood player that was rated high enough to be warranted in that spot, and that was Dan Houston, who had a big game in defence. He's really finding himself this year comparatively to last year. Outside of that, Jack Crisp and Braden Maynard and Josh Dacos are your next best, and then it starts to drop off quite substantially. I mean, you have a look at the bottom rated players on the day. Will Hayes, still side bottom, Lockie Sullivan, Patrick Lipinski, Billy Frampton, Isaac Quaynor, Beau McQuarrie, Tim Membry, Edward Allen, can't blame Allen, Oscar Stein, only in his second game. He was very big in his debut, but really dropped off in this one, which is weird. I would have thought he would have had his number against the likes of Draper and Fort, but this really was a line in the sand kind of game. It shows you where Brisbane, where they're truly at, and it shows Collingwood have some deficiencies that might see them struggle moving forward. Without Nick Dacos in the middle, can they get enough ascendancy out of there? And it's not just his ability to obtain the ball, but his ability to hit the scoreboard as well was something that was truly missing in this particular contest. We can harp on all we want about the likes of Maynard and Houston and Josh Dacos. We know defensively those players are great, but Darcy Moore leaves a very sizable hole in that defensive line. It was very evident. Even Jeremy Howe had a rough day in defence. Harry Perryman couldn't get real ascendancy. Darcy Cameron struggled in the ruck. It was just struggling left, right, and centre. It's not the Collingwood that we are used to seeing. This is a Collingwood that might be in a little bit of trouble and a little bit out of their depth if they can't get some control back into how they want to play their game. And it's unfortunate because I attribute that a little bit to Craig McRae moving the magnets around a little bit too much. When he's got players out, things start to shift, and I know you've got to do that sometimes out of necessity, but sometimes players that aren't suited for certain roles end up playing roles they're not supposed to be playing, and that just leaves opportunity for opposition to roll all over the top of you, which is exactly what Brisbane did in this particular game. Chopping it down to my 3-2-1 for best on ground for the MVP award, it was rough with the 1 vote. I think the 3 vote and the 2 vote were quite comprehensively the best 2 on the ground, but you could have thrown a blanket over a number of Brisbane players here for the 1 vote. Just to touch on a couple of players I could have gone with, we could have gone with Dane Zorko, we could have gone with Kitty Coleman, we could have gone with Logan Morris, we could have gone with Jasper Fletcher. Those were the 4 that I think are rough to miss out here. But the player that I did land on for the 1 vote this week was Zach Bailey. I thought he is starting to play himself into form. This was one of his better outings. We know what he's capable of. We saw it in the grand final last year. This was a performance that definitely is deserving of being credited to a vote or being mentioned of some kind. He had 25 disposals, 6 of which were contested, 7 marks, 3 tackles, 4 clearances, 493 metres gained, 2 goals, 3 goal assists, and 11 score involvements. It was an absolute brilliant showing from him on Thursday night. 2 votes, we've already touched on him. We are giving it to Lachie Neale. He had 29 disposals, 8 of which were contested, 8 marks, 5 tackles, 6 clearances, 346 metres gained, 2 goal assists, and 8 score involvements. And best on ground, Mr. Norm Smith himself, Will Ashcroft. 36 disposals, 15 of which were contested, 6 marks, 1 tackle, 6 clearances, 475 metres gained, 1 goal, and 11 score involvements. I warned everybody after that St Kilda game that run home they had in that 4th quarter was going to be momentum that they now carry forward, and Brisbane can now become that powerhouse that we're used to seeing. This is only solidified more by the fact that Harris Andrews will be returning to this lineup next week, so defensively they're about to get exponentially greater. I am worried about any team right now that might be heading into a game against Brisbane now that they have found form, because this is where Brisbane really get their season back on track. For Collingwood, a couple of things, I suppose. We know Darcy Moore's going to be out for a while. Some of those defensive efforts from some players like Howe, from Quaynor, were really out of pocket and not as what we expected. Obviously, Steele Sidebottom copped that heavy knock and then couldn't really get himself into the game. Nick Dacos, how bad is this calf injury? More questions than answers out of Collingwood. I don't think, especially this early on, we can be putting lines through any team, unless, you know, you're bottom barreled in the ladder like an Essendon or a Richmond, but Collingwood need to bounce back. They have opportunity to do so this coming weekend, but I think it hinges on whether or not some players are available. 2 games of football went down on Good Friday, the first of which was earlier in the afternoon with North Melbourne hosting Carlton at Marvel Stadium. And historically, this has been a game where Carlton have absolutely whitewashed North Melbourne. So coming into this game, Carlton fans would have been up and about and incredibly confident that they could get the job done. But you need to remember, and it's turning into a meme now, second half efforts from Carlton are pretty much non-existent. And that's exactly what went down again in this game. Just wait till the match timeline is spoken about. It's incredible. At quarter time, Carlton had a very slim lead, 3-4-22, leading 3-3-21. At halftime, slim lead again, 6-4-40, leading 5-7-37. At 3-quarter time, you could have almost put a Q in the rack and thought that Carlton were going to run away with this game. 11-7-73, leading 7-9-51. And then the final term happened. And it wasn't until very late in the piece, but Carlton ended up getting ahead, and then all of a sudden, they dropped off. They capitulated. This was another fade out late in a game that saw Carlton fumble the win, and North Melbourne, 14-12-96, defeat Carlton, 13-8-86, 10 points the way of North, with a goal from Harry Sheasel to get them in front, to stem the flow, selling the candy, and then late in the piece, Jai Simpkin putting one on the board to absolutely make sure of it. This was an outstanding fight back from a young North Melbourne team. This is a North Melbourne team that many would have still touted as a bottom 4, bottom 5 prospect, but I truly believe, from what we have seen from the youngsters at North Melbourne this year, this could potentially be a team that pushes for that wildcard spot. If they can finish in 10th, in 9th place, they could cause some damage because they aren't scared to take the game on. They've got young kids that are just willing to get out there and have a crack. They don't take backward steps. This is a team that is truly going to benefit, especially in the coming years, from having these youngsters exposed to the game early. I am a firm believer that after Tasmania comes into this league, we're going to have teams like Collingwood, like Carlton, who else can we throw under there? Like Essendon with some of their senior players. We could see the Bulldogs with some of their senior players, even Geelong to a certain extent. Once some senior heads drop out of that team and it comes to only the young kids playing, those clubs are going to start dropping down, and it's going to be clubs like Richmond, like North Melbourne, like West Coast, like Melbourne. You could argue Essendon, if they start drafting accordingly, start rising up the ladder because these young kids are getting exposure. They're going to take over the game. Carlton, on the other hand, you've got to ask the question, is it now time to pull the trigger on Voss? Now, let's have a look at it collectively. They get blown out of the water against Sydney in round 0. They're lucky that Tom Lynch couldn't kick straight in round 1, otherwise they would have lost to Richmond. They then lose to Melbourne, and then they've lost to North Melbourne. They should be sitting 0-4 right now, and it's not just a 4-week fix. Gerard Whateley's come out and said, Voss shouldn't get sacked on the back of 4 weeks. It's not 4 weeks. This has been 18 to 24 months. This is any other club in this position would have already turned around and told Michael Voss to pack his bags and get the fuck out. And I think they need to start really thinking about a future without Voss here. There's also some senior players that aren't living up to expectations, so you can point the finger and you can blame people. I definitely think, though, it starts at the head. You can only implement game plans and strategies on field that the coach is implementing. And unfortunately, Michael Voss doesn't have an answer for when the flow is stemmed after the second half starts and another team starts getting momentum. He doesn't have an answer for it, and that's why Carlton are getting so squashed easily over the top. It's incredible to think. Absolutely incredible to think. There were a couple of injuries in this game, one of which has actually been announced after the fact. Now, Jacob Wiedering went down with concussion, so he will miss gather round. North Melbourne have had Finn O'Sullivan, come out, and it's been mentioned that he has potentially a broken jaw from a hip and shoulder. Now, the hip and shoulder itself didn't make contact. It was more of a whiplash motion, but a broken jaw for a young kid could see him out for 4 to 8 weeks. It's heartbreaking, especially when a young kid like that is coming off of a career, boasting experience of shutting down Zach Merritt the week prior to only 10 disposals. So, interesting watch. Keep an eye on it, North fans. Looking at the team breakdown, the disposal game was actually pretty even. 352 led 339, the way of North Melbourne's way. North had 21 more handballs. Carlton had 8 more kicks around the contest. North Melbourne did have 56 inside 50s versus 48. Now, their average, Carlton, is 48 inside 50s, so they hit that. North Melbourne overreaching a little bit by 5. Their average has been 51, sorry. So getting 56, it's, getting a little bit more return for effort, I suppose. Get the ball in there, getting better scores on the board. They were only 0.3% worse inside 50 with conversion, but both teams only ran at 50 odd percent. North Melbourne a little bit up on 50.5 as their average, and North Melbourne just slightly down, 52.3 on their average. At the stoppage, Carlton absolutely monstered the hitouts. This is a North Melbourne lineup that didn't have Tristan Cherry, so you knew they were going to get towed up in the hitout department. They pretty much broke even with clearances though, 35-31 the way of Carlton. Uncontested possessions only went the way of 10 by North Melbourne, only 1 in the way of uncontested to Carlton. So again, around the traps, very even. Carlton managed to take 24 more marks around the ground. We know they like to have a little bit of poise when using the ball. It just didn't work in their favour. Carlton led for 88 minutes of this game. 88 minutes. Only half an hour's worth of the game was led by North Melbourne. It was incredible. It was an incredible watch. It was just a great fight back. You could see when North started putting that comeback on and started gaining momentum, Carlton players started to fumble the ball a little bit. They started getting out of their depth, and it's a ripple effect. It's like dominoes. You knock one down and the rest of them fucking fall down as well, and that's exactly what Carlton have done over the last 4 weeks. You could argue they did so against Richmond as well. They opened the door for Richmond to do the same. They started to drop off. Richmond came back, despite the fact that Richmond only just lost that game. Still ruining the fact that we probably should have and could have won that game. But alas, I think Carlton, at this point in time, they've really got to start looking inward and start looking at what can change to get them to just get the ball turning and getting things back on their favour, because these capitulations in the second half aren't going to hold them in any stead. They could even just miss wildcard completely. So me having them as a bottom 5, bottom 6 team this year isn't too far of a stretch when you see the brand of football they're currently playing. With that being said, when you look at the highest rated players around the field, a bulk of them actually did come from Carlton. You had Ollie Hollins, George Hewitt, Nick Newman, Jordan Boyd, Ben Ainsworth, Mark Pittonet, all within the top 10 on the field. And it's going to be a little bit crazy because the three that I'm giving votes to in this game, only one of them actually ranked in the top 10. But again, I'm not attributing my selections for best on ground to whoever had the most disposals, who has the most fantasy points or ranking points. It's who I think had impact on the game when it was needed. And I think we start off with the one vote here, which some may question, but I digress. I gave one vote to George Wardlaw, who year after year finds himself out of this North lineup through injury, but I think he was very pivotal in this game. Only had 16 disposals, 8 of those were contested, and only took the 2 marks, but he laid 11 tackles on the day. And I think somebody who, in a contest where your team wins by 10 points, has such a defensively sound midfield game, able to shut down the likes of Walsh, Smith, Cripps around the contest with tackling pressure, definitely helped set up North Melbourne for the win. Had the 1 clearance, 113 metres gained, and also had the 3 score involvements. The 2 vote I gave to Luke Davies-Uniacke, who is having some sort of a year, and we know that this guy is capable of big things. Consistency is where he has faltered, and this year he has been nothing but consistent. 22 disposals, 16 of those were contested, 2 marks, 6 tackles, 9 clearances, 205 metres gained, and 7 score involvements. And best on ground to me was Harry Sheezel. Clutched up with that goal to put them in the lead and essentially win them the game. Around the ground, he was very clean with ball in hand. 24 disposals, 7 of which were contested, 5 marks, 2 tackles, 6 clearances, 347 metres gained, 1 goal, 1 goal assist, 7 score involvements. We know where Carlton's at, and they need to do something to change. I personally think it's time to sack Michael Voss. A lot of other media experts are saying the same. Some disagree. I would love to know what you think about that in the comments down below. As for North Melbourne, outperforming by a big stretch, I feel, to many regards that people had for them at the start of the season. Many still saying they were going to be a bottom 5 team. This is a team that has been sitting in the top 8 for most of the year. And I know we're only 5 rounds in, and it's stupid to say comments like that when we've got 20 odd games of football to go. Anything can happen from this point on. But the fact that they still found a way to win without Tristan Cherry, who was arguably one of, if not their most important key players, especially in the ruck contest, his clearance work was missing, his tackling pressure was missing, and in his absence, you have Davies-Uniacke get 9 clearances. You have Harry Sheezel step up with 6. You have George Wardlaw lay 11 tackles. You have players step up to the plate. It is this second tier of players that are getting exposure to the game that are really starting to take opportunity by the horns and run with it. And I think that's going to hold North Melbourne in good stead. Could they be knocking on the door of a wildcard round this year? Who knows? Good Friday rounded out at Adelaide Oval with Adelaide hosting Fremantle in a game that came down to less than a kick, and in the dying moments was some absolutely brilliant football, absolute cinema for people watching at home. You didn't have to be an Adelaide supporter or a Fremantle supporter to truly appreciate what this game offered, and the fight back from Adelaide during that third term was absolutely huge, because realistically the scoreboard indicates that Fremantle should have won this game by a much more comfortable margin than 2 points, which is how it fell. At quarter time, They had a slim lead, 4-3-27, leading Adelaide's 3-3-21. At halftime, it was 8-6-54, leading 4-5-29. The fight back from Adelaide in the third quarter, especially late, really got them into this contest. 9-9-63, leading 9-5-59, only trailing by 4 points Adelaide. And in the final term, they managed to get ahead. And then some things just started to systematically break down. It was Fremantle in the end, 11-12-78, defeating Adelaide, 11-10-76. Now, I do have a couple of opinions on this game. I do feel the contest where Tracy ends up getting the ball and dribbles it home and puts them in front. Absolutely brilliant goal. Do not get me wrong. I'm not taking anything away from that at all. The contest leading up to that, I feel Isaiah Dudley tunneled Josh Worrell around the contest and under the ball a little bit. Should have been maybe paid a free kick in the back. That's just me being a little bit pedantic. Maybe. But other instances, Adelaide had opportunity. I mean, Ben Keys plays on from a tackle that Riley Thilthorpe lays and ends up not only missing the goals, but it bounces over Tex Walker's head and gets out of there. So it was a huge loss for them there. They had other opportunities. I mean, Riley O'Brien gets the ball and kicks it into the man on the mark. I don't know how that guy's getting a game. He used to be such a highly touted ruckman. I don't know where the drop-off has happened. And they have another instance where they have a late shot on goal and Alex Pearce puts on a diving smother effort. It was just absolutely, as I said, cinema. It just had so much going for it in that final quarter that had people on the edge of their seats. And that's what you'd love to see in primetime slots like this. It does come with a little bit of a more sour note as well, because Luke Pedlar did end this game with a jaw injury. Not a A-grade player by any means, but he's a role player. He has a role to play, and week in, week out, he does that. So it's going to be interesting to see how long he is out for with that given injury. Nothing else to really speak about apart from just how good of a finish that was. Just as a neutral supporter watching that game, I was on the edge of my seat and I was cheering for both teams as if I supported Adelaide or Fremantle, and that's what you love to get out of a good game of football. Having a look around the traps, Fremantle dominated the disposal game by 59, not just by kick, and kicks were only 15 the way of Fremantle, but they had substantially more handballs, 44 around the traps. They did have 7 more inside 50s, and they were down well on their inside 50 efforts. Their standard this year that they have set is 60% inside 50 efficiency. This match only had them at 47, and for Adelaide, they were up on their conversion, only kicking at 45 as their average, but kicking at 52. A lot of people making comments about Adelaide being roughly adjudicated the last couple of weeks. They did have 6 more free kicks. Do with that as you will. The hit-out game was very even. 46-48, the way of Fremantle's way. Clearance game, dead even. 39 apiece. Contested possessions was only split by 15, the way of Fremantle, but it was uncontested possession that was won by 46, where Fremantle just able to get easy handball chains, were able to set up plays, and none bigger obviously than that last play that saw the turnover from Riley O'Brien kicking it into the man on the mark. Handball, big kick in, handball, goal. Easy as that. Easy as you like. Fremantle coming down to Adelaide and picking up a win here is huge, because I say week in and week out when I talk about Fremantle that on paper, I believe they have one of the best teams in the competition, but their consistency wavers way too much, and it's their efficiency and their consistency away from Optus Stadium, away from Western Australia, where they kind of fall into a trap of falling off into oblivion. The fact that they've come down to Adelaide and put on a decent performance against Adelaide at home is a big win for them, because we know Adelaide play out of their skin at home. They're another team that kind of falter a little bit away from their home ground. So being able to capitalise on a game like this, huge for Fremantle's season. But again, for Adelaide, another close contest where they have lost to a competitive team. It's not the same outcome we're used to seeing from Adelaide. I definitely feel they are feeling the pinch of missing players like a Rory Laird. They're missing Mark Keane in defence, 100%. Mitchell Hinge, they're missing as well. I believe they did bring back Jordan Dawson this week, but his input was very minimal to what we're used to seeing from him in the way of, normally he gets a good amount of score involvements. He was only involved with 2 in this game. He hit the scoreboard a couple of times, but again, kind of underperformed to his standards a little bit, I feel. Maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh. The 3 players I did land on for votes in this particular game were Fremantle players, and I think when it came to the stemming of the flow in that final term and just having enough composure to keep the game on their terms throughout the duration of the game, these 3 were critical. The 1 vote I gave to Luke Jackson, who had 20 disposals, 14 were contested, 1 mark, 7 tackles, 26 hitouts, 7 clearances, 200 metres gained, 1 goal assist, and 6 score involvements. The 2 vote I gave to Andrew Brayshaw, who I think again is having a very underrated season. 25 disposals, 11 were contested, 10 tackles, 7 clearances, 397 metres gained, 1 goal, and 7 score involvements. And best on ground in this game to me was Caleb Sarong. He has a good game, he has a down game, but he rocked up to Adelaide and he played comfortably well. 32 disposals, 13 were contested, 3 marks, 8 tackles, 6 clearances, 630 metres gained, and 6 score involvements. Fremantle getting things back on track. 2 wins in a row. Really starting to show that their list is capable of doing big and better things. Adelaide have kind of gone a little bit stagnant. They've kind of petered off a little bit. They're kind of, we're used to seeing them up here based on last year. They're dropping down. I did say I thought Adelaide this year would be the team to drop out. Last year they did have a compromised run. They had a fixture given to them that was softer due to what happened the year prior. Are they getting exposed? I don't know. Can they get things back on track? I definitely think they can, but I think just like Collingwood, they're feeling the pinch of players that are critical to their makeup that are missing due to injury. 2 games on Saturday, the first of which was at the MCG with Richmond hosting Port Adelaide, in a game that I truly thought my boys had the capabilities of picking up their first win of the season. Port Adelaide had been hit structurally in their defence with outs to Radaglia, Rosé, Marshall, all through injury, and I really thought, even though Tom Lynch is missing from our forward structure, even though we've got no Nankervis in the ruck, we had opportunity to capitalise on this game if we could move the ball in a smart manner. But unfortunately, our game plan is somewhat to be desired. Young kids still finding their feet, and another second half capitulation saw Port Adelaide run away with a rather sizable win in the end by the tune of 42 points. Breaking down the match timeline, they led 1-6-12 to 1 behind in the first quarter. At halftime, it was 5-7-37, leading 3-4-22. Three-quarter time was 8-11-59, leading 4-8-32. And the final score was 13-12-90, defeating 6-12-48. So much could have happened to turn this game on its head. At one point in the second term, when Maurice Rioli takes a Mark of the Year contender, I think it was outclassed by a mark in the next game we're going to talk about. But Maurice Rioli standing tall, taking that mark and kicking that goal was a momentum turner, because we then have Liam Fawcett kick back-to-back goals and gets us back in this game. We're only trailing by 15 points. It is a margin that can be stemmed by many means. And kicking off the third term, we came out hot, we came out strong. It's unfortunate that Richmond capitulates like this in second halves, especially as late as they did in this game, because it overshadows performances from young kids that need to be highlighted. Like Sam Grill has another great game, and I love to see a kid who's only played his third or fourth game of AFL football take the game on. He is not scared to grab the ball and run and carry and try to get the 1-2 and try to break lines with speed. Kane McAuliffe comes in, doesn't get midfield exposure, but when he has the ball in hand, looks very composed. I feel Uze's biggest problem right now as a coach is he is trusting too much in senior players to get the job done when senior players are failing to do so and they're getting outshone by our kids. Jacob Hopper surprisingly ran at something like 81% efficiency, only had 4 or 5 clangers. I could have sworn I saw him give up at least 15 of the bastards, but he has had a very poor start to the year. Nick Vlosten is yet to take an intercept mark for 3 games that he has played. Outrageous. Nathan Broad, in and out with injury, can't really find as much sustainability as he usually has in that defensive half. Outside of Tim Taranto and maybe Jaden Short, our senior players are not delivering to the standard we're used to. And it's hard for a young group to grow if your senior players aren't manning the charge. In this game, I thought our best were Sam Grill. Liam Fawcett had 4 shots on goal. Yes, he kicked 2 out on the full, but he nailed 2 in his first game back in a very long time. I feel we have to persist with him as a key forward. We don't have a ruck. We play Mykelti Lafau. We bring in Samson Ryan. Samson Ryan, don't get me started. He matched the hitouts, which I thought was great. But around the ground, he is like a deer in the headlights, and he goes and gets himself suspended by a gut punch off the thing. And we're struggling enough in the ruck stocks as it is. So fucking stupid. Campbell Gray gets sent to defence instead of having to play a primary ruck role, and was one of our best on the day. It's just, I think there needs to come a time where at this point in time, Richmond have nothing to lose. Why isn't Uze rolling the dice and giving these young kids a crack? We've got in the VFL, Tom Burton. We've got Patrick Rechko doing great things. I think they deserve a call-up. We've got Ollie Hayes-Brown, who maybe makes a debut this coming week because we don't have any other chance to do so. But as a Category B rookie, how long is he going to sit on our list and not get a senior game? It is now time to see whether he can step up to the charge. Start sending some of these senior players to the VFL if they're not willing already to put in performances worthy of keeping their spot. Don't gift spots because they're senior players and we need their leadership. Fuck that. Fuck that. We're in a rebuild. Get exposure into the kids. That's where I'm at with this situation right now. Breaking down the team disposals, this is again an effort where the losing team is only marginally pushed out by team stats. The scoreboard doesn't reflect the effort. They only lost this game by 12 disposals. Port Adelaide had 7 more kicks. Richmond had 5 more Port had 5 more handballs. That's it. That's all it was. 12. Inside 50s. Richmond actually had 4 more than Port Adelaide. We were kicking at 48% efficiency, which is actually up from our 44%. Port Adelaide was striking at 50%. Down from their average of 53. Free kicks, pretty one-sided. I mean, Richmond did have 13 more free kicks for the game. Do with that as you will. I'm going to make a comment in a minute, and some people are going to say, well, you had 13 more free kicks. At the end of the day, some of these free kicks were very dubious, and I'll admit that, but there were plenty of free kicks in this game that were missed. None more so than any time Alira gets near the ball. Hands in the back blatantly. I reckon there were probably 10 different times where you could have paid a free kick, and that would have had us get 23 more free kicks for the game. And I don't give a fuck. I don't understand how this guy, week in and week out, can push a player blatantly in the back and get away with it. And then even jokes in the post-game interview that he's done that he, quote-unquote, yeah, I nudged my opponent a few times under the ball. That's not fucking... We'll move on. Hit-outs. We only actually lost it by 2. So again, Samson Ryan being able to stem the flow there was great. Just around the ground, fucking terrible. We won the clearance game. It was only by 3, but it was something that we can take out. The contested possessions, we won. Was only by 4, but we won. There were some things to take out of this game that we can truly like and appreciate. We laid 14 more tackles, which is great considering they only had 12 more disposals. So our pressure was up. We can take wins like this as a rebuilding team, but then the capitulation on the scoreboard kind of undoes all the effort that we're doing here. It's mildly frustrating. Having a look at the players I picked for the votes this week, all the way of Port Adelaide. If I was to throw a vote to a Richmond player, it would have been one of either Ben Miller or Jaden Short. I thought they were 2 of our best on the day. Darcy Byrne-Jones is probably a little bit stiff here to miss out on a vote. Maybe Jason Horn-Francis as well. But the 3 I landed on, I thought in the retrospect to the contest, especially when Port Adelaide started getting a little bit more ascendancy and ran away with the game, these 3 were critical in those moments. The 1 vote I gave to Kane Farrell, who absolutely chewed us up off of halfback. 24 disposals, 6 were contested, 3 marks, 2 tackles, 1 clearance, 808 metres gained, and 9 score involvements. The 2 vote I gave to Alira. What frustrates me the most about him is not only just the hands in the back and the pushing and shoving, he was eating everything kicked his way. And I don't understand why teams do this, because you know he's going to swallow an intercept mark. When Richmond lowered their eyes and kicked the ball inside 50 to a target instead of bombing long, more often than not, we were taking marks inside 50. It's just a shame that some senior players just thought long bomb dumping is something they could do because they're used to having a Jack Riewoldt or a Tom Lynch down there to bring it down or clunk a big mark. That's not the case. We don't have them there anymore, fuckers. You need to clue up to it. The 2 vote, as I said, I did give to Aliir. 23 disposals, 14 were contested, 8 marks, 264 metres gained and 4 score involvements. And best on ground after a very slow first half, absolutely dominated the second half. And there's no surprise that when he dominated in that second portion of the game, Port Adelaide ran away with it, and that was Zach Butters. 30 disposals, 10 were contested, 4 marks, 6 clearances, 495 metres gained, and 8 score involvements. We know where Port Adelaide's at. Port Adelaide, though, have had a very soft start to the year. To think they have played 4 clubs that were touted to probably be the bottom 4. Richmond, Essendon, West Coast, and North Melbourne. They've lost to 2 of them. They couldn't have had a cushier draw. They could be sitting right now 4-0, absolutely licking their chops up the top of the ladder, where a lot of people probably thought they would be. Unfortunately, that's not the case, because still structurally, they are absolutely struggling, and they're failing to get things, synergizing and moving properly. Richmond, probably performing to the standard people thought they would, but again, efforts where the scoreboard blows out comparatively to where we actually are at, I think overshadows where Richmond's growth is truly coming from. And these young kids are definitely going to hold the club in good stead moving forward. Unfortunately, us Richmond fans, we're in for a bit of a rough ride until that time comes. The next game, the final game of the last game on Saturday, the second game on Saturday saw West Coast host Sydney. And I don't say this to be a smartass or rub it in the face of West Coast supporters, but there is very little to talk about in this game because it was an absolute drubbing, and I feel I might have cursed West Coast, and I do apologise, because in my tipping video I highlighted that a couple of years ago Sydney had a 200 plus point game where they won by 150 odd, and I made a comment saying with how West Coast is playing, I don't think a win of 100 plus points will be coming anytime soon. Sydney won this game by 128 points. I'm sorry, West Coast fans. I think I put the moz on you guys. It was game over at quarter time, and it's just purely comes down to a young rebuilding team with a lot of kids. And in this game, the 10 youngest kids were all from West Coast. Against a club like Sydney, who were touted as a top 4 contender, as a premiership contender, especially with the acquisition of Charlie Curnow during the off-season. It was just Sydney, green lights all the way home. Quarter time, 6-2-38 led 5 behinds. Half time, 13-5-83 led 2-8-20. 3/4 time, 130, 20 goals 10 led 3-11-29. And the final score line was 24-19, 163, defeating 4-11-35. The second term, they lit it up a little bit, West Coast. They did kick themselves to 2 goals 3, but obviously they also gave up 7 goals 3. And then after half time, they only managed to kick 2 goals 3 for the game, where Sydney went on to kick 11 goals 14. Could have been an absolute, 200 plus point drubbing. And that's hindsight, right? Could have been what I said wasn't going to be. Thankfully, no injuries out of this game. There was a mark of the year contender taken by Isaac Heaney on Harley Reid, giving the good old nutsack a rub on his fucking chin and then his forehead on the way up. Huge grab by Heaney. Team stats, as we break it down, again, when you win by 120 odd points, when you put on 160 points on the scoreboard, there's no surprise of the disparagement between stats here. 427 disposals the way of Sydney, leading 289 for West Coast. They had 80 more kicks. They had 60 more handballs. They did have 16 more inside 50s. So West Coast were getting decent looks inside. Unfortunately, only striking at 35% inside 50, down from their 51% average. And Sydney, 73% of the time, up from their 54% average. 10 free kicks more the way of Sydney. I don't think that would have played into 128 point drubbing at all. I thought the game was actually rather cleanly adjudicated. Hit-outs monstered the way of Sydney, 35-18. Clearances actually only 13 the way of Sydney. So West Coast found a little bit of ascendancy in the centre clearance. Contested possessions, they cleared it by 40. In the uncontested possessions, they cleared it by almost 100. They had almost 100 more uncontested possessions around the ground, and that's where it counted the most. Sydney also had 50 odd more marks. Even though they were 128 points up, they still had no shame in kicking the ball backwards and sideways to set up their systems. And unfortunately, when you win as big as you do here, it does fall into kind of working as a quote-unquote training drill. And again, I'm not poking fun at West Coast there, but this is where Sydney, with that comfortable lead, can start working out different gameplays, can really take the sting out and bring other people into the game. That's exactly what they started doing. At no point in this game did West Coast lead at all, but tackling pressure was up. I mean, they only lost the tackles by 12. To lay 12 less tackles in a game where they had a monster amount more of the ball, I think kind of stems out and flows out a little bit. The effort was there. There were some West Coast players in this game that fought their absolute guts out. I thought Tim Kelly again was good for West Coast. Willem Dersma is one of the most composed kids in front of goal that I've seen in a very long time. Getting absolutely belted, but having enough to go back and slot 2 goals with ease from long range was absolutely incredible to see. Outside of that, though, a lot of players down on effort. Job Shanahan, I thought, for what he did, played a good game, played out of defence this particular game, had 6 marks, still got very strong hands. He's going to develop into a brilliant defender. I feel he should play defence. He could be a key forward. Maybe moving things around with him is what McQualter's trying to do here, but he did predominantly play more a defensive role this week. A lot of players could have gotten votes off me here. Jake Lloyd was good, Jai Sarong was good, Riley Bice was good, Justin McInerney, Angus Sheldrick, James Jordan, Chad Warner, James Rowbottom. List goes on and on and on. When you win by over 120 points, I mean, you can just throw a blanket over a numerous amount of players. But here's the 3 I landed on, and they are the highest rated players on the field. The 1 vote in game 200 I gave to Tom Papley. 24 disposals, 7 were contested, 10 marks, 2 tackles, 3 clearances, 575 metres gained, 2 goals, 3 goal assists, and 14 score involvements. The 2 vote I gave to Brodie Grundy. 28 disposals, 18 contested, 4 marks, 5 tackles, 33 hitouts, 9 clearances, 312 metres gained, 1 goal, and 13 score involvements. And best on ground, coming off of his little hamstring issue that he had, is Isaac Heaney. 26 disposals, 10 were contested, 8 marks, 1 of which would be comfortably leading mark of the year, 2 tackles, 4 clearances, 518 metres gained, 4 goals, and 12 score involvements. Again, a tale of 2 teams. West Coast had won 2 games back-to-back, but was it the weight of expectation that crushed down on them? Was it just having 10 of the youngest kids out on the field with not much exposure to the game, not being up to the task because of their age? Or was it Sydney coming off of a break, Sydney being better placed as a club? I think it's just straightforward. Sydney are a better team and were expected to do bigger things. And unfortunately, West Coast were the team they ran into this given week. I wouldn't be hanging my head in shame. West Coast were touted to not win any games this year, have won 2. Some kids still stood tall in this game, so there's still plenty to take out. I know a loss like this is demoralising, but you find the light where you can find it, and there definitely is some for West Coast fans. 2 games on Sunday, the first of which was Melbourne hosting the Gold Coast at the MCG. In a game where, coming off of the bye and undefeated up until this point in time, a lot of people expected the Gold Coast to absolutely whitewash Melbourne. And it did the polar opposite. Melbourne came out and absolutely picked Gold Coast apart. Now, I don't know whether this was because they've come off the bye and Melbourne have picked up a win prior, so obviously they've got a little bit more momentum heading into this game, whether or not a player like Matt Rowell is still a little bit undercooked, whether the loss of Christian Petrarca as their main ball mover and score, like hitting the scoreboard and generating scores, is missing. I don't know what fell apart here. I thought at one point Jared Witts might have been injured because he had little to no impact in this game. It just turns out Max Gawn just absolutely made him his bitch. And this was a game where Matt Rowell wasn't tagged. Noah Anderson wasn't tagged. Stephen King ran the Tholstrup tag on Touk Miller, of all players. So it still allowed a Noah Anderson or a Matt Rowell to get off the chain, and they just could not get it done. They did lead at quarter time, but after that, it was all fucking systems go for Melbourne. 25, 4 goals 1, leading 18, 2 goals 6 at quarter time. At quarter time, Gold Coast led 4-1-25 to 2-6-18. At half time, Melbourne had got the lead 8-8-56 to 8-2-50. Three-quarter time, Melbourne led 13-12-90 to 12-4-76. And the final score saw Melbourne 16-13-109 defeat Gold Coast 14-5-89. In that final term, Melbourne went on to kick 3 goals won, Gold Coast only managing to muster the 2 goals won. It was just damage done in that third quarter. Damage was done in the third quarter, and it wasn't the usual suspects. Some young kids for Melbourne really standing tall in adversity. A lot of people, including myself, thought Melbourne would drop off to be a bottom 5 team this year because of the loss of Petrarca, the loss of Oliver, Stephen May retiring. But they're finding a way to get things done here. It was very, very impressive. Just checking to make sure there was no injuries in this game. There were not. As I said, I thought at one point Jared Witts was injured, and we'll talk about his stats momentarily, but we're going to break down the team stats first, just to give you a kind of an idea of how the team, the distribution of stats went for the game. Gold Coast had 10 more disposals, for the game as a collective. They had less kicks, but they had plenty more handballs. Inside 50, Melbourne had 14 more for the game, striking at only 50% inside 50, which is what their average is. Gold Coast a little bit down. Their average is 51. They were only striking at 48%. The hit-out game, 42-27, the way of Melbourne. Huge. Clearances. Melbourne topped Gold Coast by 11 on the day. You got to think, this is against Miller, Anderson, Rowell. Some people are touting this as one of the best midfields in the comp, and they got comprehensively done by Jack Steele, who St Kilda moved on for some foolish reason for a third-round pick. Absolutely outrageous. And some other young kids attributing themselves to this team. It was a brilliant watch as a neutral supporter to see such a young team like Melbourne backs against the wall, not credited to win this game by any means, just come out absolutely swinging for the fences. I mean, efforts from Tom Sparrow, 10 tackles out there. Harry Sharp, he lays 5 tackles, has a couple of clearances, manages to hit the scoreboard. Caleb Windsor has 7 tackles with 17 touches. Jacob Van Ruin manages to pluck the ball a few times, get a couple of score involvements, hits the scoreboard. Cade Chandler lays 6 tackles. Colton Tholstrup only has 15 touches for the game, but he runs a tag on Tuke Miller, who only manages 21, so only has a handful more than what he does. Tholstrup's evolving into something that nobody expected he was ever going to be. It was an incredible watch. Xavier Lindsay managed to kick a goal and looked good off of defence. Harvey Langford kicked 2 goals. Not Harry, Harvey. Kicked 2 goals. Had a clearance, had a handful of numbers as well. Latrell Pickett hit the scoreboard. Players popping up left, right and centre, and the youth really standing tall. Obviously led the charge by the senior players as well. It's just great to see a club with a new coach, very experienced players leaving either through retirement or trade, not expected to do big things, but doing big things, and obviously placing themselves in a better situation than some other rebuilding clubs right now, especially ahead of Essendon, ahead of Richmond. But you could argue their top tier talent is still more elite than what some other clubs might have access to. At any rate, the 3 that I landed on for this game for the votes, all the way of Melbourne, were 3 of the top 5 rated players on the field. And again, these 3 seem to be core culprits in Melbourne's uprise, in being able to get the ball back in their favour, really turning the ball and the game on its head and getting some ascendancy, especially from the middle. The 1 vote I gave to Keziah Pickett. 25 disposals, 10 were contested, 2 marks, 5 tackles, 6 clearances, 633 metres gained, 1 goal, 2 goal assists, 6 score involvements. This is a guy that some weeks has such a quiet opening half, and people like on the commentary teams that are like, SEN and Triple M and Fox Footy are all rubbishing him, saying that he's had little to no impact. And then in the second half, flips the switch and becomes one of the most important players on the field. It's just, what's stopping him from being an elite player is the consistency of being elite. He can be elite in a half, that's fine. But when he starts stringing 4 quarters together and you get game after game after game where he's doing this, genuine game changer. 2 votes I gave to Jack Steele. As I said, 3rd round future selection for this guy. Captain of St Kilda, essentially shown the door. Absolutely wild. 26 disposals, 18 were contested, 5 marks, 8 tackles, 11 clearances, 208 metres gained, 1 goal assist and 7 score involvements. And Big Maxi Gawn, best on ground, dominated the ruck, absolutely killed Jared Witts. We will talk about that stat momentarily. But Max Gawn had 22 disposals, 16 were contested, 5 marks, 3 tackles, 32 hitouts, 4 clearances, 285 metres gained, 1 goal, 8 score involvements. Just to give you an idea, Jared Witts was amongst the 5 worst on the field. He only had 8 disposals. He only had 2 tackles for the game. He had 21 hitouts, but he did nothing with it. He only gained 92 metres. He was just comprehensively defeated around the contest. And when a player like Max Gawn can not only shut you down in the contest, but absolutely destroy you around the ground, you know Melbourne's in for a big day. There's no signs of Max Gawn slowing down, and the conversation now of him being the greatest ruck to ever play the game seriously needs to be had, because I feel off of his own boot, he is one of the most, if not the most important key component to Melbourne's makeup. He is absolutely phenomenal. Again, this was a game where the Gold Coast should have won comfortably on paper. Post game, they interview Damien Hardwick, and he turns around and makes a comment saying that the ladder, or the form on a ladder, means shit. Talking about where Melbourne were last year comparatively to the Gold Coast, and talking about things now with, you know, teams on paper and whatnot. And I suppose he's right, because momentum is a big thing. And coming into this game, Melbourne had a head of steam. Gold Coast coming off of a break. What this does, though, is not only does this give more belief into Melbourne to push their game on, but it puts a chip on the Gold Coast shoulder. And they're going to come out their next game looking for a little bit of vengeance. They're going to come out hitting harder. They're going to be running their lines a little bit stronger. It's going to be an interesting watch to see how they respond, because again, going into this round, they were one of 2 undefeated teams. They now sit 2nd on the ladder, but still playing incredible football. They just got beaten by a better team. And to think that Melbourne was the better team on the day, especially where people had them situated in their, you know, their own factors this year, incredible watch. Sunday night saw Western Bulldogs host Essendon at Marvel Stadium. The roof was open, it was a great night for footy, and I made a passing joke that this should have been a Good Friday fixture because we were about to witness a crucifixion. And unfortunately, I'm eating my words, because Essendon stood strong in the contest. They only lost this by 34 points. I actually did make a comment to a very good friend of mine during the week that if they were able to finish within 10 goals of the Bulldogs, they'd take that as a win, because this should have been an absolute bloodbath, especially when you see where both teams are at this year. We'll touch on that momentarily, because there is a conversation point I'd like to bring up and get your opinion on. Breaking down the match timeline though, at quarter time, 7-2-44 led 1-3-9, and that's where I thought the floodgates were going to burst. Halftime, 10-7-67 led 1-7-13. A little bit slower, but still, they're 9 goals clear. Three-quarter time, 10-14-74 led 5-9-39. Things started stemming back a little bit, and then the final score line, 14-15-99, defeated 9-11-65. After half-time, Bulldogs only managed to kick 4 goals 8. Essendon went on to kick 8 goals 3. Now, this was a conversation point I tried having with a group of friends of mine, and I got called some names and some things, and, you know, I'll wear it, that's fine. I brought up that I thought the Bulldogs, I said the Bulldogs' ineffectiveness to kick an effective score costs them from winning the premiership this year. And a friend of mine called me out and basically showed the scores that the Bulldogs have kicked over the course of the year, saying that it's a bit outlandish to say they can't kick an effective score when they're kicking close enough to 100 points every week. Where I was coming from was inside 50s versus goal conversion. And when you have a look at the breakdown of how they've performed over the recent weeks, even though if you look at goal conversions overall, they do lead the competition with goal effectiveness, I still feel when you look at the makeup of inside 50s versus goals converted, this team could be absolutely something else. Let me bring up the stats here. In round 0, they had 16 goals scored from 50 inside 50s, which had them at 32%. In round 1, they had 21 goals from 55 inside 50s, which had them at 38%. They defeated GWS quite soundly that game. In round 2, they had 14 goals from 58 inside 50s, which had them at 24%. And they had 14 goals from 54 inside 50s on Sunday night at 25% efficiency. To put that into calculation, Essendon was also 25% efficient in front of goal for this game as well. What could have been, and what could be, if they take opportunity and absolutely run with it? I mean, for the return inside 50s to what they're getting here, they could be and should be winning their games by a suitable margin, and then you could, without a shadow of a doubt, have conversations saying that they've got one hand on the premiership, because when you're getting such great return for inside 50s, you're laughing. You couldn't look any other way. Unfortunately, I feel for the Bulldogs, it's about to get worse, because they copped an injury to Arthur Jones with a hamstring. He's probably going to miss 4 to 6 weeks. And Tim English has potentially done an MCL injury, which is going to take anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks on a lower side. I don't know who they have in reserve as a backup ruckman. So, interesting to keep an eye on in that retrospect. Now, these team stat breakdowns are a little bit different from the efficiency, percentiles that I just spoke about, because it says here that the Bulldogs were 63% efficient inside 50 in this game. But that is taking inside 50s and scoring goals into equation more so than inside 50s and returning a score. Obviously, these percentiles here register goals and behinds as a score instead of just goals purely. So 63% of the time they scored, but only 25% of that 16 was for a goal. It was very interesting turnaround. I mean, it was well up on their average, 55%, and Essendon was scoring off of a bigger average as well, which is 47% of their average, and they scored at 50. Effectiveness around the ground, they were only separated by 2%. So Essendon hung in the contest incredibly well. They had 10 more hitouts, but they lost the clearance battle by 14. Uncontested possession, 40 more, or 50 more rather, the way of the Bulldogs, but they managed to keep the contested possession game to only 19 discrepancy. Marks around the contest was only 4 more the way of the Bulldogs. So Essendon found ways to really creep into this game, and none more so was the capitalisation of the Bulldogs' inability to hit the scoreboard and scoring all of these behinds. Essendon were able to rally defensively, get a forward press going, and hit the scoreboard on their own terms. And when you leave a door open like that for clubs to rebound as efficiently as Essendon were doing in moments of this game, they're going to make it hurt. Despite the fact that for the votes of this game, I've given them all to Bulldogs players, I want to highlight the efforts of Archie Roberts, who, in a losing side, had an incredible game. He had 37 disposals, 12 marks, 708 metres gained. Defensively, he was a shining light for Essendon. And when you look at some of the hits and misses they've had in their drafts, Archie Roberts is one that they have truly nailed. This is a kid who truly stands out amongst the pack as their best young acquisition. Feel free to disagree. Jacob Farrow had a good outing for Essendon as well in only his second game, so some of these selections really starting to stand tall. Unfortunately, outside of that, senior players weren't really standing up all too much. Andrew McGrath, Jai Caldwell, Zach... Where's my boy Zach Merritt? Zach Merritt had a decent game, I suppose. But outside of that, really, it's all the young kids that were trying to really insert themselves. And as an Essendon supporter, that's something to hold on to. That's a good shining light. You know, you fell by 34 points to a club that could have easily done you over by 10 goals. In a losing side, it's young kids that are highlighted as your better players. This is something that you can look forward to for the future. This is something that you want to see within a rebuilding team. Unfortunately, the discrepancy between after that is few and far, and then it's just all Bulldogs players highly ranked, and then maybe a sprinkling of an Essendon player here or there, which again, just with the Bulldogs, I don't know whether I'm being too harsh by saying they're ineffective, but when you have a look at their goal conversion versus inside 50, I feel it's the one thing that stops them from being a truly threatening team, because if you miss opportunities like they have in the past, we've seen them be inaccurate in front of goal, and teams like Adelaide, Collingwood, GWS get momentum and get the better of them, and this is what stops them from being that team that can put the final nail in the coffin, you know, to really drive the dagger in home. Am I being too harsh? Let me know in the comments down below, because some people think I am. I just think, even though this game here has showing that, you know, 65% of the time they go inside 50, they're registering a score. When you break that down into the goals kicked and you do that over the course of the year, they could be a hell of a lot more effective, and that would have them winning by bigger margins and would have them separated by a much bigger way from the rest of the teams in the competition. That's all I'm trying to say. Breaking down with the 3-2-1 for this game, again, I did go all the way of Bulldogs. I wanted to highlight Archie Roberts, though. I thought he had a great game, and that will be reflected in the Team of the Week, because even though Essendon lost, Archie Roberts does land into that retrospectively. The one vote I gave to Riley Sanders, one of the better games I've seen him play for the Bulldogs. 34 disposals, 13 were contested, 6 marks, 5 tackles, 5 clearances, 235 metres gained, and 6 score involvements. The 2 vote I gave to Matt Kennedy. Boy, oh boy, did Carlton fumble getting rid of this guy. He is such a critical role player that he could be still doing big things for Carlton, and they just sheepishly let him go. And Carlton only have themselves to blame, really. 36 disposals, 18 were contested, 5 marks, 1 tackle, 11 clearances, 307 metres gained, 1 goal and 8 score involvements. And best on ground, Sir Marcus Bontempelli. 35 disposals, 10 were contested, 8 marks, 3 tackles, 1 hit out, 7 clearances, 354 metres gained, 1 goal assist, 8 score involvements. This is a week where Essendon fans should be happy. They lost a game, but they finally saw a little bit of a competitive nature. They saw some young kids stand up to adversity. The Bulldogs, on the other hand, still sitting undefeated on top of the ladder. They might not have been as effective inside 50 with converting those goals, but are still putting on big enough scores to win, and win by comfortable margins at the end of the day. So while I'm being pedantic saying they're not kicking effective scores, they're still winning comfortably, so maybe I'm just a fucking idiot. Final game of the weekend has always delivered absolute cinema, and this is, to this day, the best game of football we have seen for 2026, and I feel it is going to be very hard to top this game for Game of the Year. 2 clubs that have a fair bit of animosity for each other, and we know that over recent years, came out absolutely swinging on the MCG in a game that saw Hawthorn defeat Geelong by 1 singular point. It was a huge game of football, which saw the match timeline truly go up and down like a fucking roller coaster. At quarter time, Hawthorn led 3-3-21 to 2-1-13. At half time, Geelong led 9-2-56 to 7-5-47. At 3/4 time, Hawthorn led 10-9-69 to 10-5-65, and the final score line saw Hawthorn win 13-14-92 to 14-7-91. Fun fact, this game never blew out by more than a single-digit lead either side. It was as tight a contest as we have seen in recent years, and the best game that we have seen for 2026 to date. This was absolutely incredible to watch, and no bigger stage than Easter Monday. Jack Gunston actually said in his post-game press conference that he has said to some young players that outside of playing in a final, he believes Easter Monday football is the biggest stage that Hawthorn plays on. And this game delivered that and then some. This was, as a neutral supporter, I think one of the best games I've even seen in recent years, let alone in 2026. It had everything you wanted. Both teams, hell and leather, going at it until the final siren. The ball was frantic. It was incredible. Turning attention to the team stats for this game, Hawthorn did have 42 more disposals around the contest and reflected better efficiency around the ground. I mean, they only had 0.3% better in disposal efficiency, leading 71.1 to 70.8. But inside 50, for their 53 inside 50s, they had a strike rate of 60.4%, which is up from their 58.7% average. 54 inside 50s for Geelong, but striking at a 53.7%. This also is a game that could have and should have been a bigger blowout to Hawthorn as well. So let's not take away from the fact that it was so close. Hawthorn had opportunity. I mean, Marbior Chol, and I feel it was just for the pure cinema of it all, missed 2 shots from inside 20 metres late in the game. That could have easily been 2 goals, and we could have been talking about a 13-14 point win here instead. When it came to the free kicks, it's funny because a lot of people have been talking about free kick Hawthorn and all of this nonsense. They had 13 free kicks for the game, which is down on their average of 19. Geelong had 24, 11 more free kicks. And the conjecture and talk out of this game is Hawthorn had 6 extra players on the field in the way of the umpires, and they still failed to win. Considering that they've got an average of 25.5 free kicks against 19, that's huge. Again, stoppages. Hawthorn monstered the hitouts. Clearances, they won. Possession, they had plenty more uncontested, and they also won the contested as well. They actually turned the ball over 10 times less too. Geelong led the marks, but we know that's how they play. And I said it going into this game, we were going to see 2 different styles of football. We were going to see the handballing and quick running game of Hawthorn playing the more methodical kick and mark approach of Geelong, which is why we see here the marking game does go the way of the Cats. The handball game, if I'm not mistaken, did go the way of the Hawks by 30. So I was correct in that retrospect. Tackling pressure was hot, 55 to 63. So it was a very high octane, high pressure scenario. But again, at the end of the day, Hawthorn walking away with the 1-point win in Game of the Year. It was such a big win. Where does it sit both clubs moving forward? Where it should be. Both of these teams are vying for a top 4 spot. We know Geelong always find ways to finish in that top 4. They will always find their way to a prelim because that's how Geelong operate. Hawthorn, are we finally seeing the team that can make it all the way? Efforts like this when the game is on the line and a combination of senior players and young kids standing tall to collectively get the job done. It was brilliant to watch. I can't understate how much I loved watching this game as a neutral supporter. It was huge. A few players, honourable mentions when it comes to missing votes this week. I thought Max Holmes, Lawson Humphries, Tom Stewart all played well for Geelong. Tanner Brun played well. Also, Shannon Neal, kicking 4, played incredibly well, but he's going to miss. Josh Ward, Massimo D'Ambrosio, Jack Ginnivan, Jarman Impey, Dylan Moore, Nick Watson all played well for Hawthorn. It's tough sometimes to try to work out 3 players to pick as your best on when so many players perform, and this is why I do a team of the week at the end of the video, because I feel if I can't vote for a player, I can at least find a spot to highlight them as a better player for their role in that week. But this was a game where, outside of the best on, which I even tossed in turn between best on and second, many players could have gotten the 1. But I gave the 1 vote to Jack Gunston. Not only did he kick 3, but he kicked the match-winning behind when there was so much scrambling and pressure in that final dying moment. He had enough composure to at least grab the ball in a contested setting and hit the scoreboard. Won them the game. He was absolutely elated. Post-game, he's getting interviewed and he said he normally is tough on himself for missing a set shot and missing a goal, hitting the post. But hitting the post in this retrospect is one of the best things he could have ever done. He had 14 disposals, 4 were contested, 6 marks, 1 tackle, 281 metres gained, 3 goals, 1 goal assist, and 8 score involvements. The 2 vote I gave to Connor McDonald. I thought defensively coming out of that role, he played incredibly well. I think he should get more exposure into this midfield. Just my opinion. 26 disposals, 8 were contested, 8 marks, 3 tackles, 2 clearances, 424 metres gained, 1 goal assist, 8 score involvements. The 3 vote I gave to Bailey Smith. Even though I feel the last 2 scores that Hawthorn registered could have been altered a little bit if he had put more pressure on around the contest at that given moment, I thought he was best on, not just for Geelong, but just for the game over the period. 33 disposals, 14 were contested, 5 marks, 5 tackles, 6 clearances, 663 metres gained, and 6 score involvements. As I said, both clubs are going to be at the pointy end of finals this year. It's whether or not Hawthorn's ready to take that leap to the next level. I must credit as well James Sicily playing on a wing and then floating back in the dying moments to take a contested mark and slingshot that ball to get the score on the board that ended up winning them the game. Leadership personified. That is a player that has been dragged through the mud in recent years because he's done some dirty, dirty shit. Finally turns his head. It's the Toby Green effect, I call it. A very grubby kind of player just fucking pulling his head out of his ass and turning into something exponentially greater. That's exactly what James Sicily has done here. I can't, again, understate how much I love this game. Game of the year, Country Mile. We will see these clubs head-to-head again in finals come September. I am sure of it. Now that we've tallied up the votes, I have a definitive top 5, and we have a fair few players sprinkled without, so bear with me while I go through the leaderboard so far for the 2026 MVP award. In 5th place, equally on 4 votes, we have Brisbane's Dane Zorko, Fremantle's Andrew Brayshaw, Sydney's Isaac Heaney, and Melbourne's Keziah Pickett. In 4th place on 5 votes respectively, we have Geelong's Max Holmes and North Melbourne's Tristan Cherry. In 3rd place on 6 votes equally, we have Gold Coast's Christian Petrarca, Melbourne's Max Gawn, and Brisbane's Will Ashcroft. In 2nd place on 8 votes respectively, we have Collingwood's Nick Dacos and Geelong's Bailey Smith. And in 1st place on 9 votes respectively, we have the Bulldogs' Marcus Bontempelli, Port Adelaide's Zach Butters, and North Melbourne's Harry Sheasel. More importantly, every team has now played 4 games of football, so we now have a definitive ladder with all teams on equal amount of games. In 1st place, we have the Bulldogs, undefeated, 16 points on top of the ladder. From 2nd through to 7th, every team is on 12 points, separated by percentage. And again, I feel this year, none bigger than any other, percentage is key. We have Sydney, Gold Coast and Fremantle comprising our top 4. We have North Melbourne and Hawthorn comprising our top 6. And in 7th, we have Melbourne. From 8th to 10th within that wildcard configuration, these teams are all on 8 points respectively. Port Adelaide in 8th, Brisbane in 9th, and Collingwood in 10th. Geelong and West Coast in 11th and 12th respectively on 8 points as well, out of that wildcard by percentage. We have Adelaide, St Kilda, Carlton and GWS from 13th to 16th, all on 1 win respectively. We then have Essendon in 17th without a win, and in last place we have Richmond without a win. There is only one thing left to do before the round can be officially recapped, and that is announce my team of the week for round 4. Again, I've done this as not only a way to highlight players that I haven't voted for but thought they're worthy of talking about in a different light, but it creates opportunity to create discussion. My votes, team of the week, some discussion points I might bring out of games respectively as well. Let me know what you think when it comes to those types of things. If I need to improve, if there's different things I could be doing, I'm only going to get better with feedback. So let me know. But this is my team of the week for round 4. In defence, I have Josh Worrell and Archie Roberts in the back pockets and Alir at full back, with Connor McDonald and Caleb Daniel on the half-back flanks and Tom Stewart at centre half-back. Across the centre, I have Jai Sarong and Harry Sheasel on the wings and Will Ashcroft in the centre, with Max Gawn as this week's captain in the ruck, Bailey Smith at ruck rover, and Marcus Bontempelli as this week's vice-captain in rover. My forward line has Isaac Heaney and Keziah Pickett on the half-forward flanks and Jai Amos at centre-half forward, with Jack Gunston and Tom Papley in the forward pockets and Shannon Neal at full forward. My interchange consists of Brodie Grundy, Caleb Sarong, Lockie Neal, Matt Kennedy, and Zach Butters. My coach of the week is Alistair Clarkson, and my assistant coach of the week is Sam Mitchell. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, the round is officially recapped. I want to thank you all for joining me for another video. It does take a lot of time to piece this together, so if you do enjoy what I do, feel free to hit that like button down below. And again, if you've got any suggestions, if you've got comments, let's have a discussion about it. Comment section down below. I would love your feedback on these videos, what your team of the week would be, who you would have given votes to. If you've got ideas for content you would like to see me do, you can hit me up in the comments down below, or check out the description of this video where you'll find links to all my social media accounts as well. Feel free to follow me and reach out there. More importantly, if you want to get on board the community we are slowly building together, hit that subscribe button as well. I appreciate everybody who has done so, and anybody who contemplates doing so moving forward, I would appreciate it if you did. More importantly, again, moving forward, the bye rounds are done and dusted, so that until we get to the mid-season bye rounds, every week is going to feature every single team. So great that that's happening, because these fucking early bye rounds are doing my head in. But that's it from me, guys. I'm out of here, and as always, I will catch you guys next time.